Welcome to our workshop on resilience. Back in June, we hosted a similar workshop or live webinar with Dr. Kurnu, and we discussed some practical strategies for coping during times of uncertainty. And so we wanted to check in again with all of you and see how you're doing now that it's been a few months later. We want to discuss some of the main topics and concepts again and review how we can again apply them to our life. And we hope you find this video useful in finding ways to use psychology and some practical strategies for coping and adapting, especially during these changing times. So first, we'll just start off talking a little bit about these 10 rules from Elon Musk. To get into that, we'll go to resilience as well as anxiety and strategies for coping in general.
And then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100-hour weeks every week.
Gosh,
And
that's
then
a lot of work.
all those things improve the odds of success.
Okay.
I mean, if other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that in 1 year you will achieve what they achieve. You will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve.
Okay, I like your work ethic.
So, all right.
Thanks. Elon.
You need to work, depending on how well you want to do, particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA. And we're so hot up, we had just one computer. So the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night. 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard, every waking hour. That's the thing I would say, particularly if you're starting a company. And I mean, if you do simple math, say okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company.
Have a high pain threshold. That's it. There's a friend of mine who's got a good saying, which is that starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. Okay, that's generally what happens, because when you first start a company, there's lots of optimism and things are great, and then so happiness at first is high. Then you encounter all sorts of issues, and happiness will steadily decline, and then you'll go through a whole world of hurt. And then eventually, if you succeed, and in most cases you will not succeed, and Tesla almost didn't succeed, came very close to failure. Then if you succeed, then after a long time, you will finally get back to happiness.
Okay, so the 10 rules for success. As discussed in the video, number 1 would be work like hell. Number 2, have a high pain threshold. 3, think critically. 4, add value to society. 5, take a risk. 6, have a great product or service. 7, attract great people. 8, constantly seek criticism. 9, try something new. And 10, overcome critics. And so in this case, Elon Musk is referring a lot to some business strategies which he uses for the number of businesses that he runs. However, we can apply a lot of these things to our approach to life in general. How we attempt to tackle the problems that we face in our day-to-day life is similar to how we can better improve ourselves, and whether that's through work or school or just our day-to-day tasks in general. And there's another TED Talk that I would recommend checking out. It's called How to Gain Control of Your Free Time by Laura Vanderkam. And in this TED Talk, she talks a lot about how we like to procrastinate and make excuses for ourselves. And one of the excuses we tell ourselves is that we're too busy, whether that's too busy to take care of our own health, too busy to start a new diet or start exercising. Instead of saying that we don't have time, we should try admitting that it's actually just not a priority to us at that moment, at least. So it really puts into perspective the amount of time we actually have and how we choose to use it. One of the exercises in that video also is called the year review. And so what I would like everyone to do now is grab a piece of paper or just take some time to think about this prompt on the screen, and that's imagine that it's the end of 2021. And put yourself, let's say, into the future. And if you were there at that moment, what are 3 to 5 things that made it a great year for you? And feel free to pause here and just take a moment to think about that. And when you're ready, we'll continue on to resilience.
Perfect. So next we're going to be talking about resilience. Especially during these challenging times, we've been given a little bit of extra time to self-reflect. And as we are all going through different things and different circumstances, we will endure them together and also emerge from them, hopefully, in a positive light. And so when we talk about resilience, we're talking about the process of adapting in the face of adversity, essentially. So being resilient is kind of the ability to bounce back in the face of a challenge. And it doesn't mean that we're not allowed to express our emotions and cope with our pain and deal with loss during these times, but it's kind of an indication of how we react to the challenges that we face and how we emerge from them as we move forward. So it can give you more control over the expression of your emotions, and it's okay to express them, but as well moving forward and not kind of getting stuck when you face a challenge is kind of what resilience is. And there are quite a few different types of resilience. So there's the inherent resilience. This is essentially kind of like the resilience that we're born with. It has the ability to protect us. It's kind of the sense of play that we have as children when we're curious and willing to take risks. Over time, however, especially in our society, sometimes that risk-taking behavior kind of gets muted by fear of failure or kind of having higher stakes. But there is adapted resilience as well, and that can occur at different points in our lives, and it can be triggered by challenging experiences that we face, such as losing a job and then going out the next day to look for a new one. And it also allows us to channel our energy and be more productive. And that's kind of one of the main goals of resilience, is to keep or maintain productivity, even if we're not meeting the results that we want, but to kind of just keep our end goal in mind and keep trying. And the last one is also learned resilience, and this is built up over time, and we kind of have this stored inside of us, and whenever we face a situation that's kind of similar to one in the past, and we've learned how to deal with it, we kind of enact this learned resilience where we kind of tell ourselves, it's okay, I've been through this before, I know what to do, and then keep going. So why is resilience important? Firstly, it encourages us to stay productive, like I mentioned, and channel our energy into action. It's really easy to get stuck and kind of fixate on mistakes that we make and kind of dwell on them for a long period of time. But staying productive and channeling that energy into something new and trying something new is really key in resilience. As well, it helps us maintain a balance. So like I mentioned as well, when we do face adversity, we are going through many negative emotions, stress, and pain, but kind of maintaining our resilience and remembering our end goal helps us keep a balance so we're not stuck all the time. And then it also protects and promotes positive mental health and well-being, because it's really easy to be consumed by negative thoughts. But as long as we kind of keep that energy and that motivation in the back of our mind and try and put ourselves out there, it kind of creates a better headspace. So next, we've included as well a slide on alcohol and atrial fibrillation. So there was a randomized controlled trial done in Australia, and they looked at adults who consumed approximately 10 or more standard drinks per week and who also had paroxysmal or persistent atrial fibrillation. And the reason we wanted to talk about this specifically in regards to alcohol is alcohol has been seen to be used as a coping mechanism in a lot of stressful situations, bouts of depression, and especially during this challenging time that we're all enduring together, it can definitely be sought out as a coping mechanism. However, the study really emphasizes that excessive consumption of alcohol is actually associated with incident atrial fibrillation and atrial remodeling, which is bad. We don't want that. And it's also been proven to have negative effects on the body, including damage to the liver and heart function. So this study really kind of emphasizes how dangerous it can be to consume alcohol, especially with COVID-19 and its effects on the immune system. So it's recommended altogether to stop consuming alcohol, or at least work to limiting your alcohol consumption over time. So next, we're just going to talk briefly about normalizing failure. So it's okay to try something and not succeed. Everything can really be taken as a learning opportunity, and you'll have the opportunity over the course of your lifetime to reflect back. But if we get stuck and kind of don't want to try new things, I think that's kind of when our learning stops. And that's when we start to lose resilience as well. So how to overcome these kind of bouts of negative energy that we might get into is to really surround ourselves with people that are supporting us and encouraging us to be our best self and try new things. Like we'll mention again in this video, it's really easy to be consumed by negative thoughts and emotions, and they kind of take up a lot of our time. And we don't really need to be surrounding ourselves with people that are reinforcing those same negative thoughts we're having. So instead, we really want to find people in our circle that are encouraging us to try again and get back up and get back out there. So it's really a combination, I would say, of self-motivation, finding it in yourself to kind of evaluate your mistakes and move forward, and also getting support from others that's going to benefit you and put your needs first. So next, we're just going to be talking about anxiety.
Okay, so anxiety is related to resilience in the sense that part of building resilience is being able to recognize anxiety and employ constructive strategies to help cope and deal with it so you're able to move on. So anxiety is most definitely a common effect of lockdown, and it's important to understand what it is. So anxiety in moderation isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's an adaptive, healthy emotion. It's evolved over time. It's part of survival. If you're not anxious or worried about certain things, then you're not going to be able to adapt to everyday life. And in moderation, it can give us energy to handle different situations. However, in excess, that's kind of when it becomes a problem. So it causes catastrophizing ruminations, so being fixated on ideas and constantly thinking about them. It can lead to a fight or flight response. So that's when your body is kind of primed because it thinks it's about to take on this fighting situation or a situation where you have to run away from an issue, and that's associated with you have an increased heart rate, you breathe a lot faster, and you can have a persistent state of that if you're constantly anxious. And it can also prevent purposeful actions. You're not able to do meaningful tasks or move ahead with tasks in your day because your anxiety is crippling to the point that it's making you fixate on something specific. So the National Science Foundation found that there are about 60,000 thoughts per day, and of these 60,000 thoughts, 80% are negative and 95% are repetitive, which could lend it to having those fixated thoughts with negative connotations that can sometimes characterize anxiety. So one important distinction to make is thinking versus worrying. So uncertainty can often lead to anxiety and the need for control. So our feelings have the ability to guide our decision making. So when you're worrying about a particular situation, you're fixated on a certain problem, it has the ability to cloud your judgment and guide the way you make decisions. So the problem with relying too much on feelings is that feelings are temporary and they tend to be self-contained, so they're biased. Your feelings towards yourself or about a situation can differ and are relatively subjective. So relying on them to guide your course of action can lead to, making mistakes or undertaking different actions that aren't necessarily going to work in the best favor for you. So cognitive dissonance is a psychological concept. So it basically involves behaving contrary to one's beliefs and anxiety. So for example, an example of cognitive dissonance would be being really anxious about a situation, but acting as though you're not anxious at all. So there's a disconnect between the way you're behaving and what you're actually thinking. So in terms of explaining behavior, when you say it feels good, resolving anxiety requires changing the attitude towards a situation in order to match your behavior. If you're acting in a way that feels good, you will be challenged to kind of mental state and the way you're viewing the particular situation to match the way you're behaving. And then we think it's good, and so it's right. So what feels good to us may become, what feels right for us. And to just discuss further in terms of, we'd mentioned like procrastination a little bit earlier on in the introduction. We often tend to think that procrastination is the result of laziness, but some studies have shown that it's actually driven by our desire to avoid difficult emotions. So that's just an example of how wanting to run away from a particular type of emotion leads to us acting in a particular way that doesn't necessarily work in the best sense for us. So with respect to cognitive dissonance, if you're able to change your behavior so that even though you're recognizing these are difficult emotions you want to avoid, but you're confronting the task, it can kind of help you mentally become prepared to view the task in a different way so that it matches the way you're acting. So now we'll talk about thinking traps, which are overly rigid patterns that can negatively affect well-being. So we'll be discussing two stories that are going to come up in the different types of thinking traps we'll talk about. So the first is about Shannon, who has been getting into many conflicts with her colleagues, which has been affecting her job performance. And then there's Aaron, who's a first-year university student, and he's struggling with time management in his first semester, and his first semester grades are lower than expected. So there are 5 common thinking traps. There is mind reading, which is when you assume that you know what the person in a situation is thinking. There is me, which is believing that you are the sole cause of every setback. There's them, which in contrast to me is believing that external factors are the cause of every setback. There's catastrophizing, which is spending critical energy ruminating or thinking about something particular. And then there's helplessness, which is believing that you have no control over the negative events that are occurring. To discuss the first thinking trap, mind reading, we think to Shannon, who after fighting with a coworker, she starts to think that the coworker thinks that he's better than her and that he shouldn't have to do that type of work. And as a result, she gets really frustrated. She can't deal with him. She can't look with him. She has to look at him. She has to remove herself from the situation. So she just completely disconnects. So this kind of illustrates the fact that she's making an assumption about what the other person involved in the situation is thinking, regardless of whether or not that's true. And the resulting behavior is impacting her job performance. It's causing her to disconnect from her coworkers. And it could be based on an opinion that might not even be true. We don't know what the coworker was thinking in that situation. So falling into this thinking trap can definitely have a negative impact. Then there's the me thinking trap. So when we look at Aaron, who had received those poor first semester grades, he starts to think that he's not cut out for the place, he's not smart enough, everyone else is more accomplished. So again, he's thinking that the setbacks in his grades is entirely due to his own efforts and it's due to him not being able to cope with it. And as a result, he stops going to dinner with friends, he starts withdrawing from social situations, he becomes a lot more isolated. So in this situation, by believing that he is the sole cause of every single setback that he's faced, it has a negative impact on his behavior by isolating him from a situation. And again, this might not entirely be true. There could be multiple factors that are contributing to the situation he's finding himself in. And he's kind of he's taking a very negative approach to it. And as a result, removing himself from networks and people who could really be helping him get through it instead. Then there's the them thinking trap. So thinking back to Shannon, having an opinion of her colleague that the reason that she's so upset has to do with her coworker being in over his head and being unqualified to do the job, and he's just not capable of doing that. And as a result, she gets so annoyed that her heart is pounding and then she storms down the hall. So that result of the heart pounding is a characteristic, fight or flight response where your heart rate increases and you feel that sense of anxiety and adrenaline coursing through you. And that's entirely due to the fact that she's attributing all of this anger and this sadness that she's feeling towards someone else not being able to do their job, which again might not necessarily be true. So instead of being able to evaluate the situation from multiple perspectives, she's fallen into the trap of thinking that there's just an external locus of control and it's only external factors that are affecting her. And there's catastrophizing. So with Aaron in this thinking trap, he thinks that with grades like these, I'm not going to be able to apply to the program I want. I can't do that. I'm not going to have the skills that I need to get the job that I want. I'm going to be stuck. It's something I don't even want to do with for the rest of my life. And as a result, he's so anxious that he starts to make himself sick by getting headaches, and he tries to do some reading and he can't focus, and he's just having a really bad day. So this is a prime example of how taking something and making it so exacerbated that you keep thinking that it's the end of the world can lead to a really anxious state. And in this case, it's not just affecting his mental ability to be able to accomplish his tasks, but it's also affecting him physically. He feels physical pain based on this anxiety that he's internalizing. So this just demonstrates how falling into the thinking trap of catastrophizing can lead to kind of an escalation of events that puts you in a situation that's very like anxiety inducing when it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And then the last one is helplessness. So Shannon describes her coworker, the two of us were like oil and water. People don't change. We're stuck. I am who I am. He is who he is. And that's it. And Shannon basically, as a result, finds herself totally drained. She just gives up. She throws in the towel on the project. So helplessness is one of those situations in which you find that nothing you can do helps you overcome a negative situation, and as a result you end up giving up. And that kind of puts a hole in resilience, because resilience is all about being able to get up and to move on past a situation. So if you fall into the trap of thinking that nothing you do is going to make a difference, there's nothing you can change about the situation, it not only impacts your ability to be resilient, but it can cause you to further get into an isolated, anxious situation that's a lot harder to come out of if you're not able to get around thinking of the situation that way.
Alrighty, so now we will be talking about some of the strategies that we can use to become more resilient. And the first method is called worry time, which is on the next slide. And when we worry, we try to deal with uncertainty, but in an unproductive way that creates anxiety. So scheduling worry time can help limit this anxiety to certain times of the day. For example, it's better to worry during the day rather than at night, which is when you're trying to fall asleep. And in that scheduled worry time, just take 15 to 30 minutes to write down everything that's on your mind. And after the scheduled worry time ends, focus on the other tasks that you have at hand. And on the next slide, we'll see a quotation from Anne Frank. And despite living through the Holocaust, she writes, "I don't think of all the misery, but of the beauty that still remains." And her words demonstrate immense optimism because she chooses to focus on what she does have rather than on what she has lost. And on the next slide, we see that optimism is defined as the belief in a positive future, that although the present may be filled with challenges, the future holds the promise of hope. And optimism is critical in resilience. Some researchers call it the engine of resilience, and there are both mental and physical benefits of optimism. Optimists often experience greater social support because their positive attitudes lead to stronger friendships and support systems. And they also report increased relationship satisfaction, greater quality of life, and they're less likely to experience symptoms of depression. And physical benefits include a more robust immune response, which is critical during the COVID-19 pandemic because having strong and efficient bodily defenses can help you fight off disease. And optimists are also less likely to have coronary heart disease, and they're less likely to be rehospitalized and more likely to live longer. And these benefits are pretty incredible. So on the next slide, we'll learn what sets optimists and pessimists apart. So there are three main differences between positive thinkers and negative thinkers. There's cognitive differences, behavioral differences, and emotional differences. First, cognitive differences. Optimists are skilled at identifying problems, which is helpful because being aware of the problem helps people take steps to actually change their situation. And optimists also see trials as challenges rather than as threats. So for example, if an optimist were to receive a negative health diagnosis, they would say something along the lines of, this is going to be hard, but I have the skills and the abilities to cope with the situation. And finally, optimists are able to identify what they can control, and they're more likely to accept aspects of the situation that they cannot control. And behavioral differences demonstrate that optimists are approach-oriented. They develop strategies to change the situation rather than avoiding the situation altogether. And if we use the same example of optimists receiving negative health diagnoses, an optimist would take the initiative to seek out information, asking, well, what is this diagnosis? And who are the doctors that can help me? Optimists are more likely to ask for help. Therefore, they're also more likely to receive support. And furthermore, optimists engage in proactive behaviors, and they often have consistent exercise routines, which translates to better physical and emotional health. And finally, emotional differences are also significant. Optimists experience more positive emotion overall, and they use humor as a coping mechanism, which diffuses stress, and this improves their overall emotional health. And on the next slide, let's now consider a case study. So imagine that you are a patient and your doctor has explained to you that you just experienced a major heart attack. And a pessimist's reaction would be, well, my dad died of a heart attack, so this is all genetic anyway. There's nothing I can do. And this set of beliefs leads to withdrawal, preventing any purposeful action. Without adopting healthier eating habits and engaging in more physical activity, the pessimist is more likely to re-experience another heart attack. On the other hand, let's now consider an optimist's response. An optimist would say, well, my dad died of a heart attack too, so this is a wake-up call. My future is bright because I'm capable of changing my behavior. The optimist identifies areas of improvement, changing to a plant-based whole foods diet, and maybe incorporates aerobic and non-aerobic exercise into their routine. And by taking purposeful action, the optimist is less likely to experience a subsequent heart attack. So we now see that pessimists and optimists can find themselves in the exact same situation. However, their reactions towards their situation is what sets them apart. You do have the power to lead a healthier, happier life, but lifestyle changes can always start with your attitude. And on the next slide, we're now going to transition into talking about gratitude. And this is a quotation from Melody Beattie, who's a self-help author. She's survived the death of her own child, but she uses her story to help others overcome grief and pain. And to her, gratitude makes sense of her past, brings peace for today, and creates a vision for tomorrow. On the next slide, we'll see that gratitude is a cognitive frame that involves two things. First, focusing on what you are receiving, and second, thinking about the goodness that surrounds you. Gratitude is a critical part of well-being because noticing what you receive from others keeps us strong. And there's also a difference between pangs of gratitude versus a sustained practice of gratitude. So how can we incorporate practical gratitude strategies in our lives? And on the next slide, I'll be answering that question. So there are 5 strategies that I'll discuss, and try using just one for the next week and then share your experiences with us. So the 5 strategies include visual cues, family blessings, talking to loved ones, immersing ourselves in nature, and finally, gratitude post-its. So first, visual cues. This is a quotation from someone who has used this method, and he says, "You can see my accept the good poster. When I'm really wallowing and I'm going downwards, I'll come and stand in front of it and think, accept the good. Really listen, think about the things that are good in your life, and I have got lots of good." So he uses a poster as a visual cue to think positive, grateful thoughts. And if you don't have a poster, that's completely okay too. You could use different visual cues like notes pinned to a bulletin board or cue cards. You could even write your favorite positive quotations on cue cards and string those cards together like this person has on the bottom right corner. And carry around the cue cards with you, and every time a negative thought arises, just pull out those cards and flip through them. Sometimes we just need little reminders of positivity, and visual cues provide us with that. And secondly, on the next slide, we'll talk about family blessings. So one family says it's been about 5 years since we started family blessings, 3 blessings every night. And we call it the 3 blessings, and it's a special time where we all gather together in my son's room. We cuddle up and we share the special events of each day, and we do 3 each. So this activity combines not only a habit of gratitude, but also family time. And the more you practice gratitude, the deeper and more meaningful your gratitude will become. So for example, if you try out the family blessings, you may start off being thankful for things like a good meal, but then that becomes gratitude for encouraging words maybe that you heard from a friend. So it's really fascinating to see how you and your family can grow in the depth of your gratitude. And on the next slide, we'll talk about the next strategy, which is talking to loved ones. So even if you're not physically present with your family members due to the pandemic, we can still try to use technology to bridge those gaps. And one lady describes, the way that I practice gratitude is texting my mom every morning. She lives across the country from me, so it's very important for me that I keep in touch. And I usually either say I love you or I send her a picture of something that I took during the day. And even though she's 2 hours behind and it's like 4 in the morning for her, she always texts me back. So that's just a great way for me to start my day. Talking to loved ones reminds us of the important relationships that we have in our life, which by extension helps us remain grateful for these people. And keeping in touch with your loved ones also builds a support network that can help you through challenging times and help you stay resilient. And on the next slide, we're going to talk about immersing yourselves in nature. And this is a very beautiful way to incorporate gratitude in your life. And this quotation says, "One of my favorite things to do is take walks in my neighborhood. And one of the ways that I practice gratitude is by taking pictures while I'm on my walks. When I'm not outside, I can look back and just experience the emotion that I was experiencing when I was taking those walks." So for many, nature provides us with an escape and an opportunity for solitude and peace. And when we think negative thoughts, we can often become trapped in cycles of rumination, but getting outside, breathing some fresh air, and observing the world around you, that really puts your problems into perspective, which for many brings peace of mind. And the last gratitude strategy that we will talk about is called gratitude post-its. And all you need for this activity are post-its. And as one lady describes, I write different ways in which I'm grateful for my husband on post-it notes. I put those notes in a suitcase so that while he's away, he's reminded of the ways I'm grateful for him. Gratitude is not only taking note of the goodness that surrounds you, but it's also expressing this thankfulness to the people around you. And writing these little notes will not only help you feel happier, but it will also remind your loved ones that they are so incredibly appreciated. And you could even write gratitude post-its and stick them on your bathroom mirror, because that way one of the first things you see when you wake up is a little burst of positivity. And on the next slide, we're going to talk about SMART goals, which is a goal setting system that can help you lead a healthier, happier life. Next slide. So SMART goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So for example, a specific goal is to walk 10,000 steps a day, and a non-specific goal is to just exercise more. Exercising more is vague because there's no quantifiable element to this goal. Next, SMART goals are also measurable. You need to know if you've met your goal or not in order to track your progress. And making your goals achievable, that's also important. Cutting out all of your sugar in your diet is very unrealistic, but starting with sugarless coffee and making small steps to remove sugar is more achievable. And SMART goals are also relevant. Ask yourself, why are you working towards this goal? Is it because your doctor told you to, or is it because you care about your health? And finally, give yourself a deadline to achieve this goal to motivate you. Losing 10 pounds versus losing 10 pounds by August gives you an incentive to start eating healthy and exercising more. And the last strategy that I will leave with you is called mindful breathing. So this is separate from the gratitude strategies that we just talked about. And mindful breathing is really just breathing, but with a conscious awareness of your breath and the way that the air flows throughout your lungs. Now, I know what you're thinking, can breathing actually have an effect on my mood? And the research says yes. A study published in Nature, which is a very reputable scientific journal, found that mindful breathing increases efficiency in brain networks. And in the study, there were two groups of participants. The first group was taught mindful breath meditation and was instructed to practice it consistently. And the second group didn't do any mindful breathing. And after 8 weeks, both groups completed 2 tests, an MOT task, which measures visual attention and working memory, and a SSVEP task, which measures attentional engagement. And the mindful breathing group outperformed the control group in both tests. And the study concludes that mindful breathing can refine attention networks, making the brain more efficient. So even though it sounds crazy that something as simple as breathing can have lasting impacts on your health, it's true. So let's try mindful breathing. And on the next slide, I'll explain the overall concept of mindful breathing, and then we'll actually practice it. So first, we want to become aware of our current breath. Then take one hand, put it on your chest, take the other and put it on your stomach. It's on my stomach. And then you want to inhale deeply. You want your belly to expand, and then exhale deeply. That's when you want your belly to contract. And continue breathing this way for 2 minutes or for however long you need until you feel calmer. So let's try it. Again, one hand on your heart, the other on your belly, and take a couple of normal breaths, just noticing how you're breathing. And I'll do 5 breaths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was really simple. We're just noticing how the breath is flowing throughout our body. And now you just want to get into a comfortable position. Continue to have one hand on your chest, the other on your stomach, and inhale deeply for 5. I'll count you in. So inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. One more. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you would continue to do this for another 2 minutes, but for the sake of time, we'll stop here. And once you're done mindfully breathing, take a little moment to ask yourself, are you feeling calmer? Do you notice that you're thinking clear? And for me personally, I know that this whole mindful breathing thing can seem a little unusual, but the more you practice it, the more natural it will feel. And if I'm feeling anxious and overwhelmed, I notice that because my heart rate increases and my breathing becomes a lot faster and a lot shallower. And those are cues for me to start mindfully breathing. And once I'm done with my 2 minutes of mindful breathing, I feel much calmer and I feel ready to take on whatever challenge comes my way. And that's all we have about resilience for you today. Feel free to reach out to Dr. Kernew 232@gmail.com if you have any questions. And thank you for joining.